welcome everybody to this latest 30-minute webinar from Meridian West. I'm Alastair, Beddow, Managing Director. Really pleased today to be joined by two of my colleagues who I'll introduce to you in a moment. We today are talking about a really exciting topic. I think a topic that's really come to the attention of many marketing and BD leaders within professional services and B2B, and that's all around brand, how to track brand, how to make it differentiated, and how to make it sure that it's really delivering value for you and your firm. So today, really delighted to be saying I'm joined by Ben Kent, founder director at Meridian West, who's going to be sharing some of his long view of several decades of professional service experience, seeing brands change and evolve, and also by Bertie Heppel, who's one of our senior consultants who works a lot on brand projects for a number of professional services clients, helping them to think through what their brand means to clients and also to track the performance of their brand over time. So I wonder, maybe we start just with some first principles, if you like. I suppose, let's pick apart that word brand. Ben, can you just give us a sense around what to you that word brand means in a professional services or B2B context?
Yeah, so I think the brand in professional services does differ from kind of B2C. I think it's very much more about the people and the culture. And there's almost no distinction between the outward brand and the people, because most people's perception of brand is from interactions with the people. That's both kind of exciting and challenging for marketers, because you have to become kind of change managers and cultural engineers as well. I think the other thing which is quite interesting is, you alluded to, I've kind of been researching professional services markets for the last 30 years. And I think the meaning of brand has really changed. I think historically, professional services firms is principally about, who's got the strongest reputation for areas of expertise, tax, risk, etc. And where are they in terms of size? Now, I think brand is meaning much more than that. It's much more, people are looking at the culture of the firm, what's their higher purpose, if you like. So I think branding is quite an interesting place right now in professions.
Interesting. And just to say, if people have got questions as we go through, please do drop them into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try and pick those up as we go through. So I guess you've articulated there, Ben, what brand means, and I think you've alluded to the fact that we have seen changes, and we'll kind of come into some of those in a bit more detail shortly. But why does this matter? Because you could argue, couldn't you, that one brand is very similar to another. Does this actually influence the way that buyers of services think about who they want to use? What's the case there, do you feel?
I think absolutely. In some ways, you can say that brand matters more in professional services than it does when you're buying a tangible product, simply because it's hard to assess the quality of what you're buying. And so much as, do you trust the individual you're dealing with it? So I think, yes, absolutely, it does matter. So that's a kind of intuitive answer. I thought there's also a fact-based answer, which is, we've been running brand tracking campaigns across, law, accountancy, property consultancy. And you see a very strong relationship between simply just brand awareness and favorability and propensity to buy. So there you can see the connection between how well known a brand is, the willingness to put them onto a shortlist and actually select them. And there's also a connection between the price point you're willing to pay, and it's much more than, do I trust the advice from this particular lawyer? They're much more willing to pay for, more from a well-known brand name that will impress the CEO.
Interesting. And Bertie, what's your reflections on that? Because you spend a lot of your time, measuring and tracking how these brands are performing. What's the evidence that it's actually kind of cutting through to buyers ultimately?
I agree. I mean, we do see, so in some of the brand tracking projects that we do for for example, some of the large accountancy firms, what we do see is there is a definite correlation between individuals who see a brand as highly differentiated and know a brand well, and those who are willing to then go through the entire kind of path to purchase, through to kind of making the final decision on which service provider to use. So we definitely do see that correlation is there. I think as well, in terms of why do this, why track brands in the first place, I think there's an inherent risk in not, to a certain extent. We've done projects in the past where Perhaps it's the first time round that a brand has been tracked, or this kind of research has been done, and the results have been surprising to the client. There's individuals out there who see the brand in a way that the client didn't particularly figure into their own kind of brand strategy, their own kind of growth strategy. So really, it's about, I think, equipping yourself with all of the knowledge and all of the research that you can get into how your brand is perceived.
Yeah. And it's interesting, I kind of alluded to it in the introduction. I think we've certainly seen in the tracking study we do with PM Forum, the marketing leaders benchmark, over the last couple of years, brand has really spiked up as an area of interest for CMOs. They're investing, and I think the pandemic and what's happened over the last couple of years has certainly been a catalyst for a lot of that. I think, as you mentioned, Bertie, people have kind of reconfigured the way that they think about the kind of advisors they want to work with. And Ben, you were talking about brands becoming more encompassing, purpose, culture. Can you say a little bit more, Ben, around some of those bigger trends that you've been seeing in recent years around B2B brands?
Yeah, I think it's I think we've seen more change in branding in the last 5 years, and I've seen the 25 years ahead of that. And I think there's 3 trends I'm seeing. I think first of all, brands tend to talk about their internal capabilities. Now it's quite interesting, how many firms are making quite bold claims about how they help kind of businesses grow. So it's not about legal advice or accountancy advice, it's we help businesses grow. And some firms are going even beyond that, and they're talking about how they help society kind of prosper. I think the first firm that really did that was EY, with kind of building a better working world. But ever since then, we've seen Bain, for example, is talking about their boldness. Even law firms, DLA Piper it's quite a brave tagline. It's kind of success solved, I think. I never saw that, a year ago. I think the second trend is all the firms are trying to diversify off their base. So classically, got the big 4 diversifying into legal, technology, consulting. So I think that's why brand is so important, and they're investing big time to achieve that. But we're now seeing the kind of specialists fighting back. So we're doing work with an environmental consultancy wants to take on the big 4 and re-establish themselves as the go-to sustainability consultancy. And I think the third trend is the much greater sophistication in terms of developing and measuring brand. So using pulse surveys, using funnel metrics, linking social listening with survey data, and using some quite advanced kind of key driver and analytics, I think is really kind of exciting. So quite a lot of change.
And Bertie, are you seeing those trends reflected in the work that you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's an increasing need to differentiate on the basis of what Ben was saying already. These kind of very simple, kind of almost one-word taglines: boldness, trust, growth, innovation, things like that. And I think I can't help but wonder if that's a direct result of the pandemic to a certain extent. I think so much of what informs a brand in professional services is that relationship, that personal relationship. But as we're increasingly online, I think having these very, very quick, snappy mental shortcuts to help individuals kind of, I suppose, digest what it actually means to work with a specific organization becomes increasingly helpful. And as firms' product and service offerings grow, and as more firms kind of consolidate into doing more things at the top, I think it's even harder to differentiate on the basis of service.
I think the other thing which has been a stimulus for change is professional firms are under greater scrutiny than they ever were. So they have to appeal beyond just the CFO or the GC. You're seeing law firms and the big 4 in the news, sometimes for bad reasons, about work-life balance, about just how much money they're making, about scandals. So they're having to rebuild their brands with the public and regulators. and also the war for talent. We're doing some work in the US for one of the big four, looking at how do you get people to move to the big four as opposed to Google or JP Morgan. So that's driving a lot of their brand activity.
And that's really interesting, because I think some of the things that both you and Bertie were saying there, I think strike at one of the things that's really interesting to me is this notion of authenticity and credibility in brands. And I think, Bertie, you were talking about, using some of these anchor terms, innovation, boldness, trust, purpose. We see this coming through in terms of messaging, but then how authentically lived is that experience? Because I guess my question is, we're seeing, or would you agree, we're seeing a kind of overlap between, on the one hand, brand, and on the other hand, client experience and how clients interact with firms. What do you think, Ben?
I agree. I think, by holding yourselves up as doing good in society, there's, it opens yourself up. I think, it's easy to be cynical and say it's greenwashing or whatever. But I think, I am impressed actually by the initiatives that firms are taking. So Bertie and I have been working with one very large law firm creating an index, a maturity index on their looking at their DEI performance. And that's really looking under the bonnet and measuring the impact of that. So these are pretty impressive initiatives. And likewise with ESG, I think there's people are asking for and getting real reports that look under the bonnet.
Interesting. And I guess, Bertie, you were alluding to some of the work that Meridian West has been doing, supporting brands and on their kind of brand development, brand strategy, but then also kind of measurement. Tell us a little bit about some of the ways that firms can go about doing that. How do you start when it comes to measuring a brand? Are there particular KPIs that you'd look at? Are there particular things that indicate how a brand is performing in this market?
Yeah, there definitely are. I mean, I think that the first principle of this is to make sure that the plan, the research plan, the kind of whatever you're going to do in order to whatever you're going to track actually aligns with the purpose, the reason behind it, whether that be tracking the effectiveness of individual marketing campaigns, whether that be tracking overall sentiment, or if it's kind of linked to a specific growth strategy or a specific product launch. But within that, I think there are some kind of overarching KPIs which do, I think, tend to have kind of very general use. So first off, I think just tracking brand sentiment, I think is a good hook to kind of hang all the rest of the data that we get off of. Certainly it's something that we use quite extensively in correlation analyses to actually see kind of what moves the dial, what doesn't, but also tracking that all along the path to purchase. So what's the sentiment on the open market versus soon to be clients, current clients, non-clients, ex-clients, and what does that kind of reveal about the way a brand is perceived. The other one is attributes. So we've already spoken about some of those kind of one word attributes. I mean, in the B2C world, the way that they do this research is they'll kind of just absolutely flash up a picture of whatever it is a Coke Zero can and say, does this kind of represent boldness to you? I think it's not a kind of a million miles off what we do to a certain extent. We have a series of attributes which we ask buyers the degree to which that they feel they align with specific brands, specific firms, and then we also ask them how important those attributes are to them, and from that we can gather both the level of importance but also the level of differentiation for the particular brand that we want to measure. And we can see, okay, yeah, so if this particular client wants to hang their hat on digital transformation, say, are they actually is that the right thing to be hanging their hat on, but also B, are they sufficiently differentiated from their competitors in that area? And then the third thing is just I think benchmarking. It's more than just tracking the one brand. It's about tracking all the brands within your peer set in order to get that kind of I think crucial context to the research that you're getting.
Interesting. And just in terms of the best kinds of approaches here, because again, I suppose, we've been talking about some quite nuanced things to do with, language, words, phrases, as well as, before we even get to think about, the imagery and the kind of presentation of those ideas. So, how much of the kind of feedback do you see is qualitative, is kind of rich, nuanced, and how much can you rely on, KPI based, awareness indexes going up and down, that kind of thing? Where does the balance fall between those two approaches?
I think it's entirely nuanced. I think it's entirely a case of, every pulse or wave or quarter or however often you kind of conduct these studies, really drilling deep down into the narrative of what has happened in that time period, and really kind of looking in a holistic way at all of the data that you're collecting. Because at the end of the day, it's again to compare to B2C. We're not asking thousands of people every pulse here. We're asking a very, very select number of kind of very senior buyers, decision makers. So within that, I think it's important to kind of squeeze as much kind of information as we can get out of them in every quarter. That does mean taking into account the context of the quarter as well. Has one of your main competitors had a brand refresh or a relaunch during that time? How has that affected things both for them and also for yourself as a competitor to them? So it's about looking at, I think, everything together.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with Bertie. I think we do two types of branding projects. We do kind of brand development projects, and we do brand tracking. So the brand development tends to be much more around focus groups, testing out visual IDs, testing out in a qualitative way value propositions and finessing those. But I think then when you sort of and often those are around after kind of post merger, when you're trying to bring two brands together. And I think that the brand tracking, yes, its principal purpose is to track the brand, but I think also you want to make it as practical as possible. So linking this campaign with how it's actually impacting the brand. So, you ask questions around it. Do you recall the advertising campaign? What did you take out of it? Where did you see it? And then ultimately, how did it impact on the brand and the propensity to buy? And I think our goal is to make brand tracking as useful as possible so you can fine tune your campaign strategy. And we've had quite a lot of success with that, actually, with some of these big four firms doing their kind of big spend campaign.
Interesting, because that was going to be one of my next questions, is about, ultimately this is really for firms about how they derive kind of commercial value from their brand, right? So, it sounds, you were starting to allude there in terms of some of the ways that you can actually start to measure ROI of, particular campaigns or spend on, refreshing, updating a brand. Tell me a little bit more about what you've seen there, Ben.
Yeah, exactly. So we've been working with one very large global professional services firm. We're spending, I think, many millions on an integrated campaign. And we did a kind of pulse survey. So we were collecting data throughout the year. And I think what we were able to do is they started off with lots of messaging, lots of related, and we were able to kind of hone in on the messaging that really resonated, which was around their technology capabilities. So I think that, that's one way. I think the second is kind of helping refine their channel strategy. So, we're spending across multiple channels, digital, in person. So we were able to finesse which channel was working most effectively for which audience.
And it is interesting because I think, again, one of the changes that I've noticed in the last 5 years or so is you do see professional services brands more visible day to day, whether you're on the tube, going up on advertising, YouTube advertising. It feels like firms are being a little bit more brave, experimental with those kind of channels. What have you seen there?
Definitely. I think, and actually I think there was one time when you looked at professional services websites, for example, they all look pretty much the same, and you didn't see them I think firms are being much braver. Sometimes you kind of go, oh my goodness, why are they doing that? But actually, our data is showing that's working. That actually does stand out. And I think the most important thing is it is kind of repositioning their brand much quicker than if you'd let it enable organically. So in the old days, to change your brand was took years, maybe decades. And I think what above the line advertising campaigns, integrated campaigns can do is you can reposition quite much faster, in a matter of kind of months or years. And that it comes back to that diversifying away from your base and being credible in these new growth areas.
Interesting. Just a reminder before you come in, Bertie, that if anyone's got any questions, do put them into the chat or the Q&A, and we'll try and cover those off as well. Yeah, Bertie, kind of tell us a little bit about, because obviously you've been kind of leading some of these projects that Ben's been talking about. What are the kind of lessons that you've learned about doing this well?
I think it's I think there are a couple of things that come into that. I think the first thing to say is just to kind of a word of caution about this is that I don't think it's correct to go into something like this and expect the dial to move too quickly. I think it is directly correlated to the kind of marketing spend that's going on that's being spent on a particular matter. So the kind of large campaigns that Ben was just talking about, yes, we have absolutely seen the dial shift quite dramatically. For some of the smaller, more targeted campaigns, maybe a one-off, maybe kind of 5 figures, which in the greater scheme of some of these kind of larger professional services firms, I think is small. In that case, the secret sauce, as it were, is really kind of drilling down into where it's been effective. So asking about, have you seen this campaign? If so, which channel have you seen it through? Really kind of understanding that kind of middle part between spend on a campaign and hopefully seeing kind of sales, or seeing sales conversations increase. What part of that has actually been effective, both in terms of channel but also in terms of message. The other thing is just also drilling down in terms of the type of audience that you're reaching as well. So especially on kind of smaller campaigns where the dial is shifting a bit less, it's about is this campaign specifically targeting buyers of kind of audit and tax advisory services, in which case let's look at that subset and let's really drill down into how things have changed there. Other than that, I think I think the secret is just making sure that it's linked back to some form of strategy, that it's not kind of tracking a brand every quarter for the sake of tracking a brand. That there's kind of other things in place to ensure that you're kind of making the best of out of the research that you're getting as well, be it kind of in your growth strategy and your kind of wider brand strategy, or even in your hiring and your kind of your talent attraction strategy as well.
And that's an interesting point, because I think, Ben, it's something you alluded to right at the start as well. Certainly something that I've seen a lot of firms doing is that blurring of the kind of the client facing brand with the employer brand or the internal brand, wanting to get the best people, attract and retain talent. How should firms be thinking about those two things, do you feel?
I think it's right. You want people to live the brand, and I think there's different elements to that. I think one is kind of, actually, we're doing more research with graduates, with kind of younger employees about what they want from a potential employer. I think also historically, client research and employee research have sat in two silos, but we're increasingly bringing those together. So we're working with a big global firm at the moment, where we're creating a dashboarding for both the client work and the employee work, and marrying up the questions. And also you can ask quite good diagnostic questions. So but if clients are seeing a weakness in service delivery or brand performance, the internal research can really help you diagnose, that's the symptom, diagnose the cause of that, so you can it becomes much more actionable. So IPO, yeah, it's I think bringing those data sources together is really powerful.
Likewise, I think it helps you ensure that whatever kind of brand promise you're making with your external branding, it actually is something that your firm can live up to. It's actually something that's kind of rooted in your own capabilities. I mean, Alastair, we did a project a while back for a kind of smaller regional law firm, where we did one, an internal and an external survey, and we found that, the way that particular firm wanted to position themselves wasn't actually possible, given the kind of I suppose it was the specific constraints that people internally were seeing. And I think there are kind of there's a huge amount of richness that can be had from just looking at these things in tandem and ensuring that they're kind of speaking to each other.
And that's an interesting point, because I think it reflects something that I hear a lot speaking to firms is maybe they're thinking about their brand, either a complete refresh or maybe a kind of more nuanced change, but seeing it as an opportunity to go after bigger clients, go after kind of more mature markets. I guess my question in the last few minutes is how much is possible in terms of brand. People talk a lot about differentiation as well. In this market where there's a lot of competition, how easy is it to break through? Or actually, should we not be thinking in those terms? Is that the wrong way of thinking about brand? What do you think, Ben?
I think you're right. I think it's interesting when we look at the data. What that shows is people think in terms of differentiation, they differentiate one group of firms from another group of firms, and that's more powerful than the differentiating the individual firms. So you've got the big four, the magic circle, regional firm, high street firm, and I think many clients come to us and say, oh, we want to win FTSE 100 clients and do more high-end M&A work. And I just have caution against that. It kind of to achieve that as a very long term, takes sustained investment and a lot of capability building. There's no branding golden bullet to achieve that.
So you can't just put up the new wallpaper and expect the FTSE to come knocking.
No. Unfortunately.
But I think tracking the brand means controlling it, and means having that kind of information at your disposal. So just by kind of embarking on this exercise, I think those kind of firms that do have a much better handle on how they're viewed, and they can inform their strategy going forwards accordingly.
Mm-hmm. And I guess just in the last few minutes, be interested to hear both of your reflections on where you think this is going next. We've talked about some of these trends that have kind of started to emerge in the last couple of years. Do you see this continuing, or are we are there kind of new things emerging in the brand sphere that people need to be watching out for? Ben, what do you think? What are the kind of trends that you'd point to?
Yeah, I think one trend actually was more to differentiate on. I think so going forward, historically, a law firm used to recruit the same sort of people and deliver the same sort of services, and the same was true of accountants and surveyors. I think that is genuinely changing. And we're seeing the kind of almost productization, the blending of technology and advice. And I think that clients are getting something different, and therefore they're getting something different, and therefore there's more option for brand differentiation. So I think that's really good, quite exciting. I think the second is the analytics are just getting better and better and better. More sophisticated techniques, applying AI and advanced data tools we've found really helpful. Key driver analysis, brand mapping. Increasingly, we're using AI tools to identify brand perceptions and propensity to buy. And I think we're integrating client research with social listening and kind of CRM data. So for me, those are the two big ones, I think.
Anything you'd add on that, Bertie?
I don't think so. I think I largely agree with that. Productization, I think a product means a wrapper, and wrappers tend to have brands. I think that follows quite naturally. On the AI front, I mean, I think it's kind of early days yet, but certainly what we've been kind of looking to do is using AI as an objective tool to kind of help, draw together perceptions from kind of disparate sources, and just trying to kind of marry up the trends from different data sets, different sources, different kind of areas.
Yeah.
Which I think AI is very good at. I don't think what AI isn't very good at is, if you go into ChatGPT and type in, what is PwC's brand like and what's Deloitte's brand like, they're going to AI is going to give you the exact same answer for everything there, because it's predictive. It's not actually knowledgeable. But what it can do is it can really kind of help crunch and analyze brand perception from multiple different sources in that a very kind of intuitive and very, very quick way.
Yeah, and I think the other thing which is really exciting, and not only for brand research but also client feedback, is the ability to ingest in-depth interviews. So what we're going to be piloting right now is a tool that can take a sound file from an interview, do an AI transcript, and then do an AI summary of that interview, and then do that across multiple interviews in a tenth of the time that it would be able to do manually, and create an objective overview of that. And I think that is super exciting for brand studies.
Absolutely. I think lots of exciting things to watch out for. And for my take would be certainly the data integration piece. I think is an incredibly powerful one, and will become even more powerful when it comes to really driving through that kind of commercial return on investment, being able to look at not just the metrics that we've talked about today, but actually the impact in terms of brand value, and how that's really changing. So I think lots to kind of dwell on there, and hopefully some key insights for people to take away. Just want to wrap up by saying big thank you to Ben and to Bertie for sharing your experiences and expertise and thoughts today. Recording of this webinar will be available on our YouTube. So if you've got any colleagues who would be interested, weren't able to make it today, please do share the link to that. And if you're interested in finding out more about some of the brand support projects and brand tracking projects that we've talked about today, including some of our own brand syndicated studies, do get in touch. We'd be delighted to have a follow-up conversation with anybody that's thinking about this for their firm. So thanks all for coming along today. Thanks again, Ben and Bertie, and join us again soon for our next